August 26, 1346. On a muddy field near Crécy, France, 9,000 exhausted English soldiers are on the verge of facing a staggering 30,000 of Europe's finest knights. The French, armed with superior numbers, heavy cavalry, and the elite of European nobility, hold all the advantages. Their confidence is so high that French nobles bicker over who will have the honor of killing the English king. 4 hours later, the battlefield tells a different story. 1,500 French nobles lie dead, including princes, dukes, and kings, while the English casualty count stands at a mere 40. Not 400, just 40. In a single afternoon, the age of the armored knight, which had dominated military strategy for 500 years, met its abrupt end, delivered by common men armed with bows and arrows. The blind king of Bohemia charged directly into the fray, determined not to miss the slaughter, while French knights trampled their own comrades in a desperate bid to escape. The mercenary crossbowmen from Genoa were mowed down by the very French nobles who had hired them. For weeks after the battle, crows grew so fat from feasting on noble flesh that they could barely fly. This is the story of Crécy, where medieval warfare, as it was known, died in the mud, where the ideal of nobility through combat was shattered by common-born archers, marking the true beginning of the 100 Years' War with France's most humiliating defeat. By the end of this video, you will understand how a weapon that cost just 10 shillings annihilated armor worth a staggering 1,000 pounds. Why French knights turned on their own mercenaries amidst the chaos, and how one blind king's reckless charge became one of the most gallant deaths in military history. Setting the stage for carnage. Edward III of England had recently landed in Normandy with around 15,000 men, claiming the French throne through his maternal lineage. As he marched, he executed devastating raids across northern France. A campaign referred to as a Savocchia essentially legalized vandalism designed to demonstrate to the French king his inability to protect his subjects. After recently plundering the town of Crécy, Edward aimed to retreat to the English-held port of Calais, but the French army led by Philip VI of France had assembled the largest military force in Christendom, 30,000 to 35,000 strong, including 12 heavy cavalry knights clad in full plate armor and mounted on armored horses. This was no ordinary army. It was a coalition of every important noble in France, bolstered by allied kings and princes from across Europe, including troops from the Holy Roman Empire and the King of Bohemia. They were eager for English blood. The French knights had long been the tanks of medieval warfare. A fully armored knight on horseback could weigh nearly a ton, bred for battle from childhood and trained in combat since they could walk. Their armor alone could cost more than an entire peasant village could earn in a lifetime. For half a millennium, heavy cavalry charges had determined the outcomes of European battles. Infantry merely existed to be crushed underfoot, and archers were viewed as mere annoyances, while the true warriors fought with swords on horseback. With an overwhelming numerical disadvantage, Edward III understood that his situation was dire, outnumbered 3-1, exhausted from relentless raiding and running low on supplies. However, he possessed one critical element that the French did not respect: 5,000 Welsh and English longbowmen. These were largely peasants and criminals who had practiced archery since childhood due to an English law that mandated regular practice. Every Sunday, English males were required to practice their archery skills, making it illegal to play other sports if there was archery training to be done. The longbow was a straightforward yet devastating weapon, a 6-foot piece of yew wood. However, in trained hands, it became a lethal tool. These archers could launch an astonishing 12 arrows per minute at a target from a distance of 250 yards. That's one arrow every 5 seconds, accurately targeting at a distance equivalent to 2.5 football fields. The draw weight was so intense, between 150 to 180 pounds, that skeletal remains of longbowmen often exhibited deformed bones, their left arms elongated from years of pulling that massive draw weight. Edward arranged his army strategically on a hill, which required the French to launch their attack uphill. He formed his men into 3 divisions, creating a V-shape with the archers at the center, allowing for overlapping fields of fire. Then he made a decision that shocked both armies. He ordered his knights to dismount and fight on foot. English nobles, historically accustomed to fighting on horseback, were now being commanded to assume the role of common infantry. This unprecedented tactic sent shockwaves through his ranks. These men had trained their entire lives for the glory of the charge, and to step down and fight like peasants was an insult to centuries of military tradition. Yet Edward stressed that survival was more important than pride, and slowly, knights in polished armor trudged into the mud beside archers clad in wool, a sight never before witnessed in Christendom. The calm before the storm. The English camp was eerily calm the night before the battle. Archers prepared their longbows, rubbing beeswax into their strings to keep them dry. Stakes were hammered into the earth and ditches were dug by torchlight. Chronicles suggest that Edward even distributed meat and ale, ensuring his men went to sleep with full stomachs, while the French army staggered into camp, hungry from their forced march. Every detail emphasized the difference between discipline and arrogance. The English also prepared the battlefield effectively. They dug ditches and created holes in front of their position to disrupt cavalry charges. They planted sharpened stakes into the ground at angles to impale charging horses, transforming the terrain into a killing field while the French were still marching toward them. Then they settled in to wait. On the French side, chaos masqueraded as pageantry. Nobles on horseback paraded by each other in gleaming armor, banners snapping in the wind, each more resplendent than the last. Dukes and counts squabbled openly about who would lead the charge and who would capture Edward alive for ransom. Some boasted that they would bring the English king back in chains before nightfall. Philip VI's attempts to impose order and calm his nobles were drowned out by the cacophony of trumpets and boasts. The army resembled less a disciplined military force and more a chaotic tournament on the verge of collapse. When dawn broke on August 26th, the French vanguard marched through the remnants of Edward's Chevauca villages still ablaze, crops scorched, livestock scattered. Peasants whispered curses as they beheld thousands of armored knights trampling through their devastated homes. To the French nobility, this sight demanded immediate vengeance. To the English, it signified that their strategy of devastation was bearing fruit. They had turned the landscape itself into a weapon. Arriving at Crécy around 4 p.m., Philip VI had the smart option of resting his exhausted army and launching an attack the next day. He initially ordered a halt, but the impatience of French nobility would not allow for patience or tactical considerations. Spotting the English on the hill outnumbered, fatigued, and far from home, they became intoxicated with the prospect of glory. Every noble desired the honor of slaying or capturing Edward III, and by mid-afternoon, under darkening clouds, a sudden rainstorm soaked the battlefield. The French knights laughed, confident their plate armor would protect them. However, for the English archers, the storm meant something entirely different. The English archers carefully unstrung their bows and tucked their strings under their helmets and cloaks to keep them dry. Conversely, the Genoese crossbowmen had no such precautions. Their strings became wet and sagged, rendering them nearly useless against the deadly accuracy of the longbow. A minor detail, a matter of a few minutes, would decide the fate of thousands. When Philip VI arrived at the field and saw the English calmly deployed on the hill with banners fluttering and their lines intact, he ordered his army to wait until the next day. But knights do not wait. Behind him, counts and dukes surged forward, insisting that the day was wasting and glory was slipping away. Some had already lowered their lances. The king's command dissolved into chaos. The French army was no longer a cohesive unit. It had transformed into a mob of impatient aristocrats, refusing to let discipline interfere with their vanity. The charge of the aristocrats, the Battle of Crécy, commenced not with a strategic plan but with pride erupting into chaos. The French vanguard, disregarding Philip's orders, advanced. Once some nobles began moving forward, others followed suit, driven by the fear of missing out on glory. The king lost control of his own army before the battle even began. What unfolded was not a cohesive battle, but a reckless charge of the nobility charging toward their demise. The first to advance were the Genoese crossbowmen, numbering about 5,000, the best mercenary troops money could buy. However, they faced a critical problem. Their large shields, known as pavises, were still with the baggage train, leaving them exposed. To make matters worse, after the brief rainstorm, the crossbow strings had become wet and sagged, greatly diminishing their effectiveness. As they approached within 150 yards, they unleashed their bolts, but most fell short. In response, the English archers unleashed a devastating volley. Contemporary witnesses likened the sound to thunder as the sky darkened with arrows. Each English archer released 12 arrows per minute, totaling around 60,000 arrows raining down on the Genoese. Lacking shields and protective cover, the crossbowmen faced a grim fate. They broke and fled back toward the French lines. Here, the situation escalated. The Count d'Ansong, witnessing the retreating Genoese, shouted, "Kill this rabble blocking our path!" In a fit of rage, the French knights charged forward into their own crossbowmen, trampling and cutting them down. The French nobility literally murdered their own mercenaries for the sin of not dying quickly enough. The Genoese were trapped between English arrows and French swords, and those who survived fled the battlefield in terror, cursing their employers. Now, the main French assault began. 12,000 mounted knights charging uphill through the mud, over the dead bodies of their fallen compatriots, into the face of English arrows. To grasp the implications of this assault, we must consider the impact of longbow arrows against armor. At longer ranges, while arrows might not penetrate high-quality plate armor, they did not need to. A well-placed arrow could strike a horse, targeting its vulnerable spots, eyes, mouth, and legs. A 1,500-pound horse hit by multiple arrows does not continue to charge. Instead, it screams, rears, and falls, creating a massive obstacle. Knights behind the fallen horses would crash into them, halting their charge. At shorter ranges, under 100 yards, longbow arrows fitted with bodkin points could penetrate mail and even plate armor at weak points. Yet instead of faltering, they surged forward into the chaos, pulling arrows out of the bodies of dead and dying French knights and firing them back. English archers effectively used their enemy's supply against them. Blinded for a decade, he insisted on participating in the fight. Upon hearing the battle was lost, he famously declared, "The King of Bohemia does not flee." He commanded his knights to tie their horses' reins to his, enabling them to lead him into combat. He and all of his attached knights fell almost immediately. When his lifeless body was found, he remained tied to his fallen companions, his blind eyes wide open, his sword still clutched in his hand. He had achieved what he desired, striking an enemy before dying. Edward III's son, the Black Prince, was deeply moved by the brave display of courage. He took John's personal emblem, ostrich feathers adorned with the motto, "I serve," which still remains the symbol of the Prince of Wales to this day. As the sun set, the French had charged 16 times 16 separate waves of nobles, throwing themselves into the meat grinder. Each wave became less coordinated than the last. French nobles began fighting one another to access the front lines, desperate for their chance at glory, only to meet the same fate as their comrades. The situation worsened when Philip VI himself charged with the final wave. His horse was struck down beneath him and an arrow pierced through his jaw. His personal guard had no choice but to physically drag him from the battlefield as he tried to rejoin the fight. Philip VI's sacred oriflamme, the battle banner of France said to guarantee victory, was left abandoned in the mud. When darkness enveloped the battlefield, the English could hardly believe they had succeeded. They remained in position all night, ensuring no wounded Frenchmen could escape. They'd run out of arrows multiple times and resorted to using knives, hammers, and stakes to finish off dismounted knights, effectively beating French nobles to death with sticks. The aftermath of carnage. When dawn broke on August 27th, the scale of the slaughter shocked everyone. The elite of French nobility lay dead in the mud, the Count of Flanders, the Duke of Lorraine, and countless others. The horrifying count revealed 1,500 noble souls lost. Among this were 11 princes and thousands of lesser knights. The Genoese who had not fled were slaughtered, many at the hands of their own employers. This created an astounding disparity of 1 English knight to every 750 French nobles. This staggering imbalance was so outrageous that contemporary chroniclers doubted its veracity. Some claimed divine intervention, but the reality was far simpler. The longbow had made heavy cavalry obsolete in a single afternoon. Yet the true tragedy lay not only in the deaths but in the identities of those who perished. Medieval warfare typically involved capturing nobles for ransom, a gentleman's agreement that ensured nobles were not killed as they held value.